In a remote Tennessee pharmacy, a brilliant pharmaceutical researcher was about to discover the true cost of trust. What started as a routine medication pickup took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a life-threatening allergic reaction. Dr. Elizabeth Harper wasn't your typical victim. For 18 months, she had spent her life building groundbreaking hypertension treatments, known for her methodical brilliance and unwavering dedication. When she encountered severe anaphylaxis triggered by tampered medication, she had no idea. She was walking into a carefully orchestrated murder attempt. Elizabeth's survival would lead to Nashville's most devastating medical takeover in history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne bubbles caught the light from the crystal chandelier above their table at the Capitol Grill, each tiny sphere rising toward the surface like Elizabeth's own dreams finally materializing. $50 million. The number still felt surreal, even with Jim Patterson's signature fresh on the patent transfer documents tucked safely in her purse. To the brilliant Dr. Elizabeth Harper, Bradley raised his glass, his smile perfect. As always. Though I have to say, darling, you really got lucky with the timing on this one. Elizabeth's hand paused halfway to her glass. Lucky. The word sat strangely after 18 months of meticulous research, countless failed formulations, and nights spent hunched over data until her vision blurred. But Bradley's expression remained warm, expectant, so she forced her smile to match his. Thank you, she said, touching her glass to his. The crystal sang a clear note that somehow felt off-key. I mean, who could have predicted that Meridian Pharmaceuticals would be so desperate for a hypertension breakthrough right now? Bradley continued, cutting into his aged ribeye with practiced precision. The stars really aligned for you. Stars aligned. As if her discovery of the ACE inhibitor modification had been cosmic coincidence rather than the result of systematic investigation into why existing medications failed certain patient populations. Elizabeth took a sip of champagne, the bubbles now feeling sharp against her tongue. The research built on some fascinating patterns I noticed in clinical trial data, she began, but Bradley was already nodding in that way that meant he was listening to respond, not to understand. Of course. But you have to admit, the timing was perfect. Just when you were starting to worry about your career trajectory. He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Now you can finally relax. Focus on what really matters. What really matters? Elizabeth sat down. Her glass carefully. Us. Our future together. The wedding planning. Bradley's thumb stroked across her engagement ring, the 2-carat diamond he'd chosen without consulting her, claiming he wanted to surprise her. You've been so stressed about proving yourself professionally. Now you don't have to. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a cage door clicking shut. Elizabeth pulled her hand back gently, reaching for her phone as it vibrated against the table. Sorry, this might be important, she said, glancing at the caller. ID Dr. Sarah Chen from Vanderbilt. Her pulse quickened. She'd submitted a research proposal to their pharmaceutical development program weeks ago. Elizabeth, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening. Dr. Chen's voice was warm but professional. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the senior researcher position. I know you said you were considering other opportunities, but, I'm sorry, what? Elizabeth's voice came out sharper than intended. Several nearby diners glanced over. I never said I was considering other opportunities. A pause. Oh. Well, when you withdrew your application last week, I assumed. Perhaps there was a miscommunication with my assistant? Elizabeth's chest tightened. I didn't withdraw my application. I have the email right here. Sent from your address on Tuesday, thanking us for our time but explaining that you decided to pursue other directions. Tuesday. Elizabeth had been in the lab all day Tuesday, running final tests on her patent submission. She hadn't sent any emails to Vanderbilt. Dr. Chen, I think there's been a mistake. Could you forward me that email? Of course. Elizabeth, if you're still interested in the position, we'd love to discuss it further. Your patent success only reinforces our conviction that you'd be perfect for our team. Elizabeth ended the call, her mind racing. Bradley was watching her with concern that looked genuine, but there was something else in his expression. Something that made her think of a cat who'd been caught with feathers in its mouth but was still deciding whether to finish swallowing. The canary. Everything all right, darling? He asked. It was Vanderbilt. About a research position I applied for. Oh, that. Bradley waved his hand dismissively. Liz, you can't seriously still be thinking about that. A senior researcher position would be incredibly demanding. 60-hour weeks, constant travel, endless pressure to publish. That's no life for a future wife and mother. I never told you I'd applied to Vanderbilt. Bradley's smile flickered for just a moment. Of course you did. Don't you remember? You were stressed about it for weeks. I told you then it would be too much pressure. Elizabeth searched her memory. Had she told him? The past few months felt strangely blurred, her focus so consumed by the patent process that other details seemed fuzzy. But she would have remembered discussing a position at Vanderbilt. Wouldn't she? Besides, Bradley continued, his voice taking on that soothing tone he used when he thought she was being unreasonable, why would you want to start over somewhere new when you could focus on our life together? We're planning a wedding, thinking about our future family. This patent success means you can step back from the rat race. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Had she always wanted that? Elizabeth found herself questioning memories that had seemed solid moments before. She thought of her childhood in rural Georgia, how she dreamed of making discoveries that would help people, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible in medicine. When had those dreams shifted to simply wanting to step back? I just think, she said carefully, that I'd like to keep my options open. Professional growth has always been important to me. Growth, yes. But not at the expense of everything else. Bradley's voice carried a note of patient concern, as if he were explaining something obvious to a child. You've achieved something incredible with this patent. You've proven yourself. Now you can focus on being happy. The implication hung in the air, that professional success and happiness were mutually exclusive. That she had to choose. Elizabeth's phone buzzed with an incoming email from Dr. Chen. She opened it, her blood cooling as she read the message sent from her own email address. After careful consideration, I've decided to pursue other opportunities that align better with my current life priorities. I appreciate your time and consideration. The language was formal, professional, and absolutely nothing like how she wrote emails. Elizabeth used contractions, more casual phrasing. And she would never use the phrase life priorities unironically. Bradley, she said slowly, have you ever accessed my email account? His laugh was perfectly calibrated, surprised but not defensive. Why would I do that? Darling, you're being paranoid. The stress of the patent process must have been more overwhelming than you realized. It's not uncommon for people to forget things when they're under that kind of pressure. That word again. Stress. Pressure. As if her greatest professional achievement had been a burden she'd barely survived rather than a triumph she'd worked toward her entire career. Elizabeth looked around the Capitol Grille's dining room, taking in the other couples. Sharing intimate conversations, the soft lighting designed to make everything look romantic and perfect. 6 months ago, this scene would have felt like a dream come true. Now it felt like a stage set, with her playing a role she didn't remember. Auditioning for. I think I'd like to go home, she said quietly. Of course, darling. It's been a long day. Bradley signaled for the check with the effortless authority of someone who'd never doubted his right to command attention. And tomorrow we can start looking at venues for the spring wedding. I've already made some calls, there are several options that would be perfect for our families. Our families. When had her family become secondary to his? When had her dreams become negotiations to be managed? As they walked to Bradley's Mercedes, Elizabeth caught their reflection in the restaurant's windows. They looked perfect together, him tall and distinguished in his tailored suit, her elegant in the dress he'd bought her for tonight's celebration. The successful doctor and his brilliant fiancée, living the American dream in Music City. But reflections, Elizabeth knew from her years in the lab, could be deceiving. They showed you what appeared to be true, not necessarily what was real. And lately, she'd been having the uncomfortable feeling that the life she thought she was living might be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. The drive home was quiet, filled with the soft jazz Bradley preferred and the weight of questions Elizabeth was only beginning to know how to ask. As Nashville's skyline glittered in the distance, she made a mental note to change her email password in the morning. Just in case. Elizabeth's fingers hovered over her laptop keyboard the next morning, the cursor blinking in the password field. Like an accusation. She'd always used the same password for everything, Bradley's birthday combined with the date of their first kiss. Simple, romantic, easily remembered. Now the combination felt less like sentiment and more like surrender. She typed in a new password, ACEI 2024 $MM, a reference to her breakthrough ACE inhibitor research and the $50 million it had earned her. Something that belonged entirely to her professional identity, untouchable by anyone else's narrative about her life. The email account loaded, and Elizabeth immediately searched for any messages to or from Vanderbilt. The withdrawal email sat in her sent folder like evidence of a crime she couldn't remember committing. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday, exactly when she'd been in the lab running final stability tests on her compound. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through her sent messages from the past 6 months. There were others. A polite decline to present at the International Pharmaceutical Research Conference in Boston. A withdrawal from consideration for a consultant position with the CDC. A response turning down an interview with Johns Hopkins for their new drug development initiative. All sent during times when she'd been in the lab, in meetings, or, she checked her calendar, during her engagement party 3 months ago. Someone had been systematically dismantling her professional opportunities while she celebrated her personal milestones. The apartment felt suddenly foreign around her. This place she'd lived in for 2 years, gradually filled with Bradley's preferences until her own seemed to disappear. When had her colorful throw pillows been replaced with his preferred neutral tones? When had her bookshelves, once packed with pharmaceutical journals and research texts, been organized to make room for his golf magazines and investment newsletters? Elizabeth pulled up her browser history, another violation of privacy she'd never thought to check before. The searches made her stomach clench: signs of career burnout in women, why successful women struggle with work-life balance, how career stress affects fertility. Mixed in with her legitimate research searches were queries she'd never made, painting a picture of a woman overwhelmed by professional demands and secretly longing for domestic stability. Her phone rang, startling her from the digital evidence of her manipulated life. Danny's name appeared on the screen, her brother's weekly check-in call that had become less frequent since her engagement to Bradley. "Hey, sis. How'd the big patent celebration go last night?" Elizabeth found herself grateful for Danny's voice, grounded and familiar in a way that cut through the unreality of her morning discoveries. It was illuminating. "Oh? I'm analyzing data that doesn't match my hypothesis." Voice. "What happened? Danny, do you remember me ever talking about feeling overwhelmed by my career? About wanting to step back from research?" A pause. "Are you kidding? Liz, you've wanted to cure diseases since you were 8 years old and our neighbor Mrs. Patterson couldn't afford her diabetes medication. You've never wanted to step back from anything in your life." The certainty in his voice was like a lifeline. "But I must have said something. Bradley keeps talking about how stressed I've been, how I've been worried about my career trajectory." "Bradley talks a lot about what you think and feel," Danny interrupted, his tone carefully neutral in a way that suggested strongly held opinions. "But when's the last time you actually told me you were stressed? When's the last time we talked about anything real?" Elizabeth tried to remember. Their conversations over the past year had become shorter, more surface level. She'd attributed it to being busy with wedding planning and the patent process, but now she wondered if something else had been at work. "He says I told him about a Vanderbilt position, but I don't remember that conversation." "What Vanderbilt position?" Elizabeth explained about the voicemail she'd received the night before from a Dr. Morrison at Vanderbilt's pharmaceutical development program, congratulating her on gracefully declining a senior researcher position she'd never heard of. The mysteriously withdrawn application, the email she'd never sent. Danny listened without interruption, and she could practically hear him putting pieces together in his methodical engineer's mind. "Liz, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. When did you start questioning your own memory?" The question hit like a physical blow. What do you mean? You just said you must have told Bradley about feeling stressed, even though you don't remember it. You're explaining away your own confusion instead of trusting what you know. That's not like you." Elizabeth sank into her desk chair, the weight of realization settling over her. Danny was right. She'd spent months second-guessing herself, accepting Bradley's version of events even when they didn't align with her own recollections. When had she stopped trusting her own mind? "There's something else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think someone's been using my email account to turn down job opportunities." The silence on Danny's end stretched long enough that she checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Liz," he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you're describing isn't forgetfulness or stress. It's not even just deception. It's systematic manipulation designed to make you doubt your own perceptions." "But Bradley wouldn't. Who else has access to your accounts? Who else knows your schedule well enough to send emails when you're not available to notice? Who else benefits from you turning down career opportunities?" Elizabeth's engagement ring caught the morning light streaming through her window, the diamond fracturing the beam into rainbow fragments. Beautiful, expensive, and chosen entirely without her input. Like so many other aspects of her life lately. "I need to confront him," she said. "Be careful," Danny warned. "Someone who's been manipulating you this systematically won't react well to being exposed. Do you have somewhere safe you can go if you need to?" Before Elizabeth could answer, she heard Bradley's key in the front door. "He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd said he had surgery scheduled all morning." "I have to go," she whispered, quickly, closing her laptop. Liz, wait, she ended the call just as Bradley walked into the living room, looking impeccable in his scrubs despite supposedly just finishing a complex procedure. His smile was warm, concerned. Darling, you look upset. Is everything all right? Elizabeth studied his face, searching for signs of deception. But Bradley had always been handsome, charming, seemingly sincere. It was what had attracted her to him in the first place. I've been thinking about that Vanderbilt position, she said carefully. Oh, sweetheart, we talked about this last night. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. He moved toward her with practiced concern. The patent success should be a relief, not a source of new stress. I don't remember discussing it with you before last night. Bradley's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of annoyance quickly smoothed into patient understanding. Liz, you've been under tremendous pressure. It's natural that some details might be fuzzy. There it was again. The gentle invalidation of her own experience, wrapped in concern for her well-being. I want to change my email password, she said, watching his face. Why would you need to do that? The question came out slightly too quickly, slightly too sharp. Security. With the patent deal, Jim Patterson recommended updating all my passwords. At the mention of her lawyer's name, something flickered in Bradley's expression. Jim Patterson, one of the few people in her professional life that Bradley had never quite managed to charm or influence. Bradley's smile returned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Of course. That makes perfect sense. Though I hope you'll still share it with me. Couples shouldn't have secrets from each other. The presumption in his words, that her digital privacy was negotiable, that his access to her accounts was a given, crystallized something that had been building in Elizabeth's chest since the previous evening. Actually, she said, meeting his gaze directly, I think some privacy might be healthy. For both of us. For a moment, Bradley's mask slipped entirely. Elizabeth saw something cold and calculating in his expression, something that made her understand why Danny had warned her to be careful. Then the warmth returned, so quickly she might have imagined the change. If that's what you think is best, he said smoothly. You know I only want you to be happy. But as Elizabeth watched him gather his things and prepare to leave for his afternoon appointments, she couldn't shake the feeling that Bradley's definition of her happiness and her own were becoming dangerously divergent. After he left, she sat in the silence of their shared apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life that suddenly felt foreign. The wedding magazines on the coffee table, filled with venues and dresses she didn't remember choosing. The kitchen, filled with his preferred brands, his dietary restrictions accommodated while hers were forgotten. Elizabeth opened her laptop again and began a new search, not for symptoms of career burnout or work-life balance, but for information about psychological manipulation and emotional abuse. The results made her stomach turn, not because they were shocking, but because they were familiar. The systematic erosion of confidence. The isolation from support systems. The reframing of the victim's reality until they no longer trusted their own perceptions. As Nashville's afternoon sun slanted through her windows, Elizabeth Harper began to understand that the life she thought she'd been building was actually a prison she'd been trapped in, one carefully constructed bar by bar until she'd forgotten what freedom looked like. The question now was whether she had the strength to break free, and what it might cost her to try. The Saturday morning drive to Bradley's family cabin in the Cumberland Mountains should have been peaceful. Elizabeth had been looking forward to the weekend retreat, 2 days away from Nashville's demands, from wedding planning pressure, from the growing tension that seemed to follow them everywhere lately. The winding roads through Tennessee's rolling hills usually calmed her, but today the motion made her stomach churn with an unease that had nothing to do with car sickness. You're quiet, Bradley observed, one hand on the steering wheel of his Mercedes, the other reaching over to squeeze her knee. Still thinking about work? Elizabeth watched the landscape blur past her window. They'd been driving for an hour, and the familiar landmarks of home had given way to increasingly rural terrain. I called Jim Patterson yesterday, she said quietly. Bradley's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her leg. About what? About the email situation. The job applications I never withdrew. Liz, we've been through this. You're under stress. Sometimes we do things we don't remember when we're overwhelmed. His voice carried that patient, condescending tone she was beginning to recognize and despise. Jim's a good lawyer, but he's not a therapist. He's recommending a forensic IT specialist to examine my accounts. The car swerved slightly. As Bradley's attention snapped to her. That seems extreme. And expensive. Why would you want to waste money on something like that? Because I need to know the truth. The truth? Bradley's laugh was sharp. The truth is that you've been pushing yourself too hard for too long. The truth is that your body and mind are telling you to slow down, and instead of listening, you're creating conspiracy theories. Elizabeth felt the familiar pull toward self-doubt, the gravitational force of Bradley's certainty trying to draw her back into questioning her own perceptions. But Danny's words from the day before echoed. In her mind, when did you start questioning your own memory? I found 17 job applications that were withdrawn or declined from my email account, she said steadily. All sent during times when I was documented to be elsewhere. Either I'm having blackouts severe enough to require immediate medical attention, or someone else is accessing my accounts. Bradley was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed her words. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a different quality, colder, more calculating. You're really going to pursue this ridiculous investigation? After everything I've done for you? After all the support I've given your career? What support? The question came out harder than Elizabeth had intended. I've been protecting you, Liz. From opportunities that would have burned you out, from commitments that would have destroyed our relationship. I've been thinking about our future while you've been obsessing over your career. By sabotaging my professional life? By making the hard decisions you were too emotional to make yourself. The admission hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Bradley seemed to realize what he'd said, his knuckles widening on the steering wheel. I mean, pull over, Elizabeth said quietly. What? Pull over. Now. Liz, you're overreacting. Let me explain, pull over. Bradley jerked the car to the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. Elizabeth was out of the passenger seat before the engine fully stopped, her legs shaky but her mind crystal clear for the first time in months. Bradley followed her, his expression cycling between anger and damage control. Liz, please. Let me explain what I meant. You meant exactly what you said. Elizabeth's voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. You've been making decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. You've been systematically destroying my career opportunities while convincing me I was losing my mind. I was protecting you, from what? From success? From independence? From having options that didn't include you? Bradley's mask was slipping completely now, his face contorting with frustration. From making mistakes that would have ruined everything we've built together. You think you know what you want, but you don't see the big picture. You don't understand how the world works. I understand that you've been lying to me for months. I understand that you've been manipulating me into doubting my own memory and judgment. I understand that everything you've told me about my own thoughts and feelings has been a lie designed to control me. They stood on the side of the mountain road, the argument echoing off the trees. Bradley's hands were clenched at his sides. And for a moment Elizabeth saw something in his expression that made her glad they were in public, even if public was just an empty stretch of rural highway. You want to know the truth? Bradley's voice was low, dangerous. The truth is that you're nothing without me. You think your little patent makes you independent, but you have no idea how to navigate the real world. You're naive, Liz. You always have been. I've been managing your life because you're incapable of managing it yourself. The words hit like physical blows, but instead of crumbling, Elizabeth felt something crystallize inside her. This was who Bradley really was, not the charming doctor who'd swept her off her feet, but a man who saw her as a possession to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. Get back in the car, Bradley commanded. We're going to the cabin. And we're going to work this out like adults. No. What do you mean, no? I mean I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm not going to the cabin. I'm not going to pretend this conversation didn't happen. I'm done. Bradley's expression shifted again, and suddenly he was the concerned fiancé once more. Liz, you're having some kind of breakdown. You're not thinking clearly. Let me help you. The only thing I need help with is getting away from you. Elizabeth pulled out her phone to call Danny, but Bradley grabbed her wrist. Don't be stupid. You're in the middle of nowhere. You don't even know where we are. He was right. The mountain road stretched empty in both directions, with no buildings or landmarks visible. But Elizabeth's pharmaceutical research had taken her to remote locations before. She wasn't as helpless as Bradley assumed. Let go of me. Not until you calm down and start acting rationally. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The grip on her wrist tightened, and Elizabeth realized with crystalline clarity that she was in danger. Not just emotionally or psychologically, but physically. The man she'd been planning to marry was capable of hurting her, and they were alone on a deserted mountain road. Let go of me, or I'll scream. Who's going to hear you out here? As if summoned by her need, the sound of an approaching vehicle rumbled up the mountain road. Bradley's grip loosened slightly, and Elizabeth wrenched free, stumbling toward the approaching pickup truck. The driver was an elderly man with kind eyes and work-worn hands. Y'all having car trouble? I need to get to town, Elizabeth said quickly. Can you give me a ride? The man looked between Elizabeth and Bradley, taking in the tension radiating from both of them. His gaze lingered on Elizabeth's wrist, where red marks from Bradley's grip were already forming. Course I can, miss. Hop in. She's fine. Bradley interjected, stepping toward the truck. Just a little misunderstanding between my fiancé and me. We'll work it out. Seems to me the lady can speak for herself, the driver said calmly. And she asked for a ride to town. Elizabeth climbed into the passenger seat, her heart pounding. Through the windshield, she could see Bradley's face cycling through emotions, rage, calculation, and finally a return to his practiced charm. Elizabeth, please, he called. Don't do this. You know you're not thinking clearly. But Elizabeth was thinking more clearly than she had in months. As the pickup truck pulled away, leaving Bradley standing beside his Mercedes on the mountain road, she finally understood the depth of what she'd been living with. The driver, who introduced himself as Tom Williams, was Mrs. Dorothy Mae Williams' nephew. He took Elizabeth to the small town of Cedar Ridge, where she found herself in the Williams family pharmacy, a modest building that served the rural community with basic medications and medical supplies. Aunt Dorothy's not here today, Tom explained, but you're welcome to use the phone, get yourself sorted out. Elizabeth was grateful for the kindness, but as she reached for her purse to call Danny, she realized she was starting to feel strange. Her chest felt tight, her breathing shallow. At first she attributed it to the stress of the confrontation with Bradley, but the sensation was getting worse. I don't feel well, she told Tom, her voice coming out strained. Tom looked at her with concern. What kind of not well? Tight chest, hard to breathe. My face feels tingly. Tom moved quickly, coming around the pharmacy counter. When did this start? Just now, I think. Maybe in the truck. Elizabeth's voice was getting weaker. I took my allergy medication this morning. New prescription Bradley picked up for me yesterday. What kind of allergy medication? Elizabeth fumbled in her purse for the bottle, her hands shaking. Tom read the label and his expression grew serious. Miss, this isn't what it says it is. I've been a pharmacist for 30 years, this looks like a sulfur-based compound. Are you allergic to sulfa drugs? Yes, Elizabeth gasped. Severely. Tom was already moving, grabbing an EpiPen from the emergency supplies. This is going to hurt, but it might save your life. The epinephrine injection felt like fire in her thigh, but within minutes Elizabeth could breathe again. Tom was on the phone with emergency services, his voice calm but urgent. We need an ambulance at Williams Pharmacy on Main Street. Severe allergic reaction, patient has been treated with epinephrine but needs immediate transport. As they waited for the ambulance, Elizabeth stared at the medication bottle with growing horror. The label was correct, it matched her prescription exactly. But the pills inside were wrong. Someone had replaced her legitimate allergy medication with something that could have killed her. Tom, she whispered, I think someone tried to poison me. Tom's expression was grim. I think you might be right, miss. Question is, who had access to switch out your medication? Elizabeth thought of Bradley picking up her prescription the day before, his insistence that she take her medication that morning, his suggestion that they drive to the remote cabin where medical help would be hours away. The ambulance arrived. And as the EMTs prepared to transport her to the regional hospital, Elizabeth's phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. Darling, I'm so sorry about our fight. I'm at the cabin waiting for you. Please come back so we can work this out. I love you. She showed the message to Tom, who shook his head grimly. Miss, I don't know what's going on between you and your fiancé, but I'd suggest you might want to have a serious conversation with the police when you're feeling better. As the ambulance pulled away from the pharmacy, Elizabeth realized that Bradley's betrayal went far deeper than professional sabotage and emotional manipulation. He had been prepared to let her die rather than lose control over her life. The question now wasn't whether she would leave him, it was whether she would survive long enough to expose what he'd done. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Elizabeth sat propped against stiff pillows, the four in her arm delivering a steady drip of antihistamines while her body finished purging the poison Bradley had tried to feed her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow that felt appropriate for the death of her illusions. Detective Maria Santos had left 20 minutes ago, promising to investigate the medication switch once Elizabeth was stable enough to provide a full statement. The evidence was being processed, the pill bottle with its correct label and deadly contents, the text messages from Bradley, the timeline of events that painted a picture of attempted murder disguised as medical emergency. But Elizabeth's mind was already moving beyond the immediate crisis, analyzing the situation with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to pharmaceutical compounds. Bradley had tried to kill her. The man she'd been planning to marry. The man she'd trusted with her life had been prepared to watch her die rather than lose control over her. The rage that filled her was cold, calculated, and absolute. Her phone buzzed constantly, Bradley's messages growing increasingly frantic. As he realized she wasn't coming to the cabin. The latest ones had shifted from loving concern to barely concealed threats. "I'm worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. This is exactly what I was trying to protect you from, making rash decisions when you're emotional. I've called your brother. He's concerned about your mental state too." Elizabeth deleted the messages without responding. Let him wonder. Let him panic. She had more important things to focus on. Jim Patterson arrived at the hospital just as the sun was setting, his usually calm demeanor shattered by the news of what had happened. He'd driven straight from Nashville, his briefcase packed with documents and an expression that suggested heads were going to roll. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. "Like I've been poisoned by my fiancé," Elizabeth said dryly. "But otherwise, surprisingly clear-headed." Jim's laugh was humorless. "I've already spoken with Detective Santos. The evidence is solid: tampering with medication, attempted poisoning, possibly attempted murder. Bradley's going to face serious charges." "Good. But that's not enough." Jim studied her face. "What do you mean?" Elizabeth shifted in the hospital bed, wincing as the four tugged at her arm. "Bradley didn't just try to kill me, Jim. He's been systematically destroying my career, isolating me from my support system, gaslighting me into questioning my own sanity. He's a predator who uses his position and charm to manipulate and control women. The police will investigate all of that, and what happens when they do? Best case scenario, he gets convicted and serves a few years. Worst case, he hires expensive lawyers and gets off with a slap on the wrist. Either way, he keeps his medical practice, his reputation, his ability to hurt other people." Jim was quiet for a moment, his legal mind processing the implications. "Elizabeth, I understand you're angry. What he did was monstrous. But you can't take the law into your own hands. I'm not talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about using the legal system more creatively." Elizabeth reached for her laptop, which Danny had brought from her apartment along with a change of clothes. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up documents she'd been researching during the long afternoon hours. Bradley's medical practice is financially vulnerable. He's been living beyond his means, taking on debt to maintain his lifestyle. The practice itself is profitable, but barely, and that's only because he charges premium rates and turns away patients who can't afford his fees. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've spent the last 6 hours doing research instead of feeling sorry for myself." Elizabeth's voice was steady, focused. "I have $50 million, Jim. I have connections in the pharmaceutical industry. I have a legitimate grievance against a man who tried to murder me. And I have a very specific plan for how to destroy him." Jim leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening. I want to buy his practice. Force him out. Turn it into something that actually serves the community instead of exploiting it. You can't just buy someone's medical practice out from under them." "Can't I?" Elizabeth turned the laptop screen toward him. "Whitmore Family Medical Practice is structured as a partnership. Bradley owns 60%, but the building is mortgaged, the equipment is leased, and there are 2 junior partners who own the remaining 40%. Jim's eyebrows rose as he scanned the financial documents. "How did you get access to this information?" "Public records, mostly. Some of it from conversations Bradley had when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The man loves to brag about his business acumen, but he's actually a terrible businessman." Elizabeth pulled up another document. "Dr. Amanda Collins is one of the junior partners. She owns 20% of the practice, but she's been increasingly uncomfortable with Bradley's policies. I've heard him complaining about her bleeding heart tendencies, how she wants to accept more Medicare patients, provide sliding scale fees for low-income families." "And the other junior partner?" "Dr. Marcus Webb. He owns 20%. And seems to follow Bradley's lead on most decisions. But he's also got significant student loan debt and a new baby at home. Money talks." Jim studied the documents, his expression shifting from concern to professional interest. "You're talking about a hostile takeover of a medical practice. It's not impossible, but it's complicated. Medical practices aren't like other businesses. There are licensing issues, patient care continuity, regulatory compliance." "I know. That's why I need you to help me do it right. Elizabeth, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully about your answer. Are you doing this for justice, or are you doing this for revenge?" Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Outside her hospital window, Nashville's lights were beginning to twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Bradley was probably still at his cabin, waiting for her to come back, to apologize, to submit to his will once more. Both, she said finally. I want him to pay for what he did to me. But I also want to make sure he can't do it to anyone else. And I want to create something positive from this nightmare, something that actually helps people instead of exploiting them. Jim nodded slowly. That's the right answer. Pure revenge is destructive, but justice combined with constructive purpose, that's something I can help you with. So you'll do it? I'll look into it. But Elizabeth, this isn't going to be easy or quick. Bradley will fight back, and he has resources and connections. His family has been part of Nashville's medical establishment for generations. They won't give up without a war. Good. Elizabeth's smile was sharp, predatory. I'm counting on it. Over the next 2 hours, they developed the framework of a plan. Elizabeth would use shell companies to approach the junior partners, offering to buy out their shares at above-market prices. She would simultaneously pressure the practice's creditors, using her connections and financial resources to create cash flow problems. The goal was to force Bradley into a position where he had to sell or face bankruptcy. What about the community aspect? Jim asked. If you succeed in acquiring the practice, how do you plan to transform it? I've been thinking about that, too. Elizabeth pulled up another document, a map of Nashville's healthcare facilities. Bradley's practice is located in Green Hills, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. But it's also adjacent to several lower-income communities that are medically underserved. Currently, the practice serves as a barrier to healthcare access rather than a bridge. She traced the map with her finger. I want to keep the premium services for patients who can afford them, that's how we'll maintain financial viability. But I also want to add community health programs, sliding scale fees, preventive care initiatives. Turn it into a model for how healthcare should work. You'll need medical professionals who share that vision. I know. That's where Dr. Collins comes in. From what I've observed, she's exactly the kind of doctor who went into medicine to help people, not to get rich. If I can offer her a chance to practice medicine the way she wants to, she might be willing to work with me. Jim was taking notes, his legal mind already working through the complexities. This is going to require significant capital investment. Are you prepared for that? I have $50 million that I earned through my own work, my own brilliance, my own dedication. Bradley tried to make me believe I was lucky, that I didn't deserve my success. But I did earn it, and I'm going to use it to destroy him and build something better. What about the personal cost? This kind of campaign will consume your life for months, maybe years. Are you prepared for that? Elizabeth thought about the question, about the life she'd been living under Bradley's manipulation. The constant self-doubt, the gradual erosion of her confidence and independence, the way she'd been slowly disappearing into his vision of who she should be. The life I was living wasn't really mine anyway, she said quietly. He stole it from me piece by piece until I didn't even recognize myself. If I'm going to rebuild, I might as well build something worth having. As Jim packed up his documents and prepared to leave, Elizabeth felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in months. The fear and confusion of the morning had crystallized into something clean and focused. Bradley had tried to destroy her, but he'd miscalculated. He'd pushed someone with the resources and intelligence to fight back. And now she was going to use everything she'd learned in her pharmaceutical career, patience, precision, and the ability to see complex systems, to dismantle his world piece by piece. Jim, she said as he reached the door. I want you to know, this isn't about becoming like him. This isn't about power or control. This is about justice. And it's about making sure that no one else has to go through what I went through. Jim nodded. I believe you. And Elizabeth? For what it's worth, I think Bradley made a fatal error when he tried to break you. You're stronger than he ever realized. After Jim left, Elizabeth sat alone in the hospital room, staring out at the Nashville skyline. Tomorrow, she would be discharged. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of taking apart Bradley Whitmore's life with the same methodical precision he'd used to try to destroy hers. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Not the diminished, self-doubting woman Bradley had tried to create, but the brilliant, determined scientist who had changed the landscape of hypertension treatment and earned $50 million in the process. Bradley Whitmore had no idea what was coming for him. But he was about to learn that the woman he'd tried to kill was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The morning sun cast long shadows across the unfamiliar neighborhood as Elizabeth drove slowly down Nolensville Pike, her rental car feeling foreign after 3 days in the hospital. She'd been discharged that morning with a clean bill of health and a burning need to understand exactly what Bradley's medical empire looked like from the outside. The Whitmore family medical practice occupied a gleaming glass building in the Heart of Green Hills, its manicured landscaping and valet parking service announcing its exclusivity to anyone who might mistake it for a place that served ordinary people. Elizabeth parked across the street, studying the steady stream of well-dressed patients entering and leaving the facility. Luxury cars dominated the parking area. Designer handbags and expensive watches caught the morning light. These were Nashville's elite, the kind of patients who could afford Bradley's premium rates and didn't question his policies. But what Elizabeth found most telling was what she didn't see: anyone who looked like they might struggle to pay for healthcare. She pulled out her phone and called Jim Patterson. "I'm outside Bradley's practice. I need you to help me understand something." "Are you sure you should be there? What if he sees you?" "He's at the police station with his lawyer, remember? Detective Santos called this morning. They're questioning him about the medication tampering." Elizabeth's voice was steady, clinical. "I want to understand the geography of his practice. How does it fit into the larger healthcare landscape?" "What do you mean?" Elizabeth started driving, following Nolensville Pike south from Green Hills. "I mean, his practice sits at the intersection of some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Nashville and some of the most underserved. But it might as well be on a different planet for all the good it does the people who actually need healthcare." As she drove, the landscape changed dramatically. The manicured lawns and expensive homes of Green Hills gave way to modest apartments, small businesses, and the kind of neighborhoods where people worked multiple jobs just to keep their heads above water. This was where Nashville's immigrants, working families, and elderly residents lived, often just miles from some of the best medical facilities in the country, but unable to access them. Elizabeth pulled into a small strip mall and sat in her car, observing the foot traffic. She watched a young mother with two small children walk past, carrying a pharmacy bag from a discount chain store. An elderly man struggled with a walker, moving slowly toward a bus stop. A woman in scrubs, probably a nurse's aide or home health worker, hurried past, her expression tired but determined. These were the people who lived in the shadow of Bradley's practice, who drove past his gleaming building every day knowing they weren't welcome inside. Her phone rang. Danny's name appeared on the screen. "How are you feeling?" he asked without preamble. "Focused. Angry. Determined." Elizabeth paused. Clear-headed for the first time in months. "Good. I've been doing some research of my own. About Bradley's practice, about the community around it." "What kind of research?" "The kind that comes from having a sister who was almost murdered by her fiancé. I may be a software engineer, but I know how to dig into public records and financial filings." Elizabeth felt a surge of gratitude for her brother's protective instincts. "What did you find?" "Bradley's practice has a charity care policy on paper, required by law to maintain certain tax benefits. But guess how much charity care they actually provided last year?" "I'm afraid to ask." "Less than 1% of their total patient volume. The absolute minimum required to maintain their nonprofit status for the building lease." Elizabeth felt her jaw clench. "He's gaming the system. It gets worse. I found complaints filed with the state medical board. Patients who were turned away for not having the right insurance, elderly patients who couldn't afford the practice's concierge medicine fees, people who were told they couldn't be seen unless they paid up front." "How many complaints?" 17 in the past 2 years. All dismissed or pending investigation." Elizabeth started driving again, this time with purpose. "Danny, I need you to help me with something. I want to understand who's been hurt by Bradley's policies. I want names, stories, faces. Liz, you can't just contact people who filed medical board complaints. There are privacy laws. I'm not talking about violating anyone's privacy. I'm talking about understanding the community impact. If I'm going to transform this practice, I need to know who it should be serving." Elizabeth found herself driving toward a small health clinic she'd noticed on her map research. The Nolensville Community Health Center occupied a converted house, its modest sign and crowded parking lot suggesting it served a very different population than Bradley's practice. She parked and walked inside, struck immediately by the contrast to the Whitmore family medical practice. The waiting room was full: elderly patients, young families, people who looked like they worked hard for every dollar. But despite the obvious resource constraints, there was something warm and welcoming about the space. "Can I help you?" The receptionist was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a voice that suggested she'd heard every kind of story imaginable. "I'm wondering if I could speak with someone about community health needs in this area. I'm researching healthcare access for a project." The receptionist studied Elizabeth for a moment, taking in her expensive clothes and careful appearance. "Are you a reporter?" "No. I'm a researcher. Pharmaceutical development background." Elizabeth hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm looking into ways to improve healthcare access in underserved communities." Becca, the receptionist, called toward the back of the clinic. Someone here to talk about community health needs. The woman who emerged from the back office was Elizabeth Sage, with the kind of confidence that came from competence rather than privilege. She wore scrubs and carried herself with the purposeful stride of someone who had important work to do and limited time to do it. "I'm Rebecca Johnson," she said, extending her hand. "Becca. I'm a nurse practitioner here." "Elizabeth Harper. I'm interested in understanding healthcare access challenges in this area." Becca's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of researcher are you?" Elizabeth made a decision that surprised her. The kind who just discovered that her fiancé has been running an exclusive medical practice that turns away patients who can't afford premium fees, while I was completely oblivious to the impact on the surrounding community. Becca's expression shifted from suspicion to interest. "Your fiancé runs a medical practice?" "The Whitmore family medical practice in Green Hills. And he's not my fiancé anymore." "Bradley Whitmore." Becca's voice was flat. "Yeah, I know that practice. We get a lot of patients here who were turned away from there." Elizabeth felt her stomach clench. "Can you tell me about that?" Becca glanced around the busy waiting room, then gestured toward a small office. "Come on back. I think we need to have a conversation." The office was cramped but functional, with medical reference books stacked on every available surface. Becca closed the door and sat across from Elizabeth, her expression serious. "How much do you know about your ex-fiancé's practice policies?" "Apparently, not nearly enough. They have a policy of requiring full payment up front for new patients. No payment plans, no sliding scale fees. If you can't pay cash or don't have premium insurance, they won't see you." Elizabeth felt sick. "What about emergency situations?" "They'll stabilize you enough to transfer you somewhere else. We've had patients show up here after being turned away from Whitmore's practice, people with chest pain, diabetic emergencies. Even a woman in labor who couldn't afford their delivery fees. That can't be legal." "It's not technically illegal as long as they're not an emergency room. Private practices can set their own payment policies." Becca's voice was bitter. "It's just morally bankrupt." Elizabeth thought about Bradley's comfortable lifestyle, his expensive tastes, his casual dismissal of patients who couldn't afford his fees. "What kind of impact does this have on the community?" "Come with me," Becca said, standing up. "I want you to meet someone." They walked through the clinic to a small room where an elderly African-American woman sat with a young girl, both waiting patiently. The woman looked up as they approached, her expression wary but dignified. "Mrs. Williams, this is Elizabeth Harper. She's researching healthcare access in our community." The woman's eyes were sharp, intelligent. "What kind of research?" Elizabeth sat down across from her, feeling the weight of the moment. "The kind that comes from realizing I've been living in a bubble while people in my own city couldn't get the medical care they needed." Mrs. Williams studied her for a long moment. "You're not from around here." "No, ma'am. I grew up in rural Georgia. Small town, poor family. My parents couldn't afford to take me to the doctor unless it was an emergency." Something in Mrs. Williams' expression softened. "Then you understand what it's like to be turned away from places that are supposed to help you." "I thought I did. But I've been privileged for so long that I forgot." "This is my granddaughter, Keisha," Mrs. Williams said, her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. "She's got asthma. Bad asthma. Last month, she had an attack while I was visiting my sister in Green Hills. I took her to the closest medical facility, that fancy place with the valet parking." Elizabeth's heart sank. "The Whitmore practice. They wouldn't even let us in the door. Said they didn't take our insurance, and we'd need to pay $1,500 up front just for them to look at her." Mrs. Williams' voice was controlled, but Elizabeth could hear the anger underneath. "My granddaughter was struggling to breathe, and they turned us away because we couldn't pay their fee." "What did you do?" "Drove 20 minutes to the emergency room at Vanderbilt. Keisha was turning blue by the time we got there." Mrs. Williams' voice cracked slightly. "She could have died because that practice cares more about money than helping sick children." Elizabeth felt tears stinging her eyes. "I'm so sorry." "Why are you sorry?" "You didn't turn us away." "Because the man who did is someone I was planning to marry. Because I was so focused on my own life that I never questioned where his money came from or how his practice operated." Mrs. Williams reached across and patted Elizabeth's hand. "Child, you can't be responsible for every evil thing done by people you know. But you can choose what you do when you find out about it. What would you want to see changed?" "I'd want to see a practice that actually serves the community. One that treats people with dignity regardless of their ability to pay. One that sees healthcare as a right, not a privilege." Elizabeth nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "What if I told you that might be possible?" I'd say you've got a lot of work ahead of you. As Elizabeth left the clinic an hour later, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at the Hermitage Cafe at 7 p.m. Come alone. Amanda Collins. Elizabeth stared at the message. Dr. Amanda Collins, Bradley's junior partner, the one Jim had identified as potentially sympathetic to a different vision for the practice. The timing felt like more than coincidence. She typed back, I'll be there. As she drove home through Nashville's afternoon traffic, Elizabeth's mind was churning with everything she'd learned. Bradley's practice wasn't just financially vulnerable, it was morally bankrupt, causing real harm to real people in the community it was supposed to serve. But more than that, she'd discovered something she hadn't expected. There were people like Becca Johnson and Mrs. Williams who understood the problem and were already working to address it. People who shared her growing vision of what healthcare could be if it were driven by service rather than profit. For the first time since this nightmare began, Elizabeth felt like she wasn't alone in her fight against Bradley. She was part of a community that had been waiting for someone with the resources and determination to challenge the system. The question now was whether Dr. Amanda Collins was ready to join that fight, or if she was another obstacle Elizabeth would have to overcome. Either way, Elizabeth was beginning to understand that transforming Bradley's practice wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice for an entire community that had been failed by the healthcare system they deserved better from. The scope of her mission was becoming clear, not just to destroy Bradley Whitmore, but to build something better from the ashes of his empire. The Hermitage Cafe hummed with the quiet conversations of Nashville's evening crowd, but Elizabeth barely noticed the warm atmosphere as she spotted Dr. Amanda Collins sitting alone in a corner booth. The young doctor looked exhausted, her usually pristine appearance showing the strain of recent events. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. Elizabeth slid into the opposite seat, studying Bradley's junior partner with new eyes. In the past, she'd seen Amanda only at practice social events, where the younger woman had seemed confident and professional. Now, away from Bradley's influence, Amanda looked vulnerable and conflicted. Thank you for coming, Amanda said quietly. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. How did you get my number? From the practice records. We have you listed as Bradley's emergency contact. Amanda's laugh was bitter. Ironic, considering recent events. Elizabeth waited, letting the silence stretch between them. She'd learned from her pharmaceutical negotiations that sometimes the most important information came from what people said when they were nervous. I know what happened to you, Amanda finally said. The medication tampering. The allergic reaction. I can't stop thinking about it. What can't you stop thinking about? That I could have prevented it. Amanda's voice was barely above a whisper. I picked up your prescription refills 2 weeks ago when I was at the pharmacy. I should have double-checked them. I should have noticed something was wrong. Elizabeth felt a chill. You picked up my medications? Bradley asked me to. Said you were too busy with wedding planning to handle it yourself. He said it was one less thing for you to worry about. Amanda's hands were shaking more noticeably now. I never questioned it. I trusted him. Amanda, what exactly did you pick up? 3 prescriptions. Your allergy medication, your birth control, and something for anxiety. Bradley said you'd been having stress-related panic attacks. Elizabeth's mind raced. She'd never been prescribed anxiety medication. I don't take anything for anxiety. Amanda's face went pale. But Bradley said, he said you were embarrassed about it, that you didn't want anyone to know. What was the medication? Alprazolam. 0.5 milligrams. Amanda fumbled for her phone. I took a picture of all the prescriptions because I was being careful with controlled substances. I wanted to document that I'd picked them up legitimately. Elizabeth studied the photo Amanda showed her. The prescription was written on Bradley's practice letterhead, in his handwriting, for medications she'd never requested. The anxiety medication was prescribed for daily use, something that would have made her drowsy, compliant, easier to manipulate. Amanda, I never asked for anxiety medication. Bradley prescribed it without my knowledge. Oh God. Amanda's voice cracked. He's been drugging you. The allergy medication, the anxiety pills, what else has he been doing? Elizabeth reached across the table and took Amanda's hand. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But first, I need to know, are you willing to help me stop him? Amanda was quiet for a long moment, staring at the prescription photo on her phone. I went into medicine to help people. When I joined Bradley's practice, I thought I was getting the opportunity of a lifetime. Work with a respected physician, serve affluent patients, build a successful career. But I've been compromising my values every day. Turning away patients who can't afford our fees. Providing minimal care to maximize profit. Watching Bradley treat medicine like a business instead of a calling. Amanda looked up, meeting Elizabeth's eyes. I've been telling myself it was temporary, that I could change things from the inside once I established myself. But I've been there 2 years, and nothing has changed except my conscience has gotten heavier. What if I told you there was another way? What do you mean? Elizabeth leaned forward, lowering her voice. I mean, what if we could transform the practice into something that actually serves the community? What if we could keep the financial viability but add sliding scale fees, community health programs, preventive care initiatives? Bradley would never agree to that. Bradley won't have a choice. Amanda's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Elizabeth pulled out her phone and showed Amanda the financial documents Jim had compiled. Bradley's practice is more vulnerable than he realizes. He's been living beyond his means, taking on debt to maintain his lifestyle. The practice is profitable, but barely. I know the finances are tight, but what if I told you I could buy out the practice? Remove Bradley entirely and rebuild it according to your medical values instead of his business model? Amanda stared at the documents. You're talking about a hostile takeover. I'm talking about justice. Bradley tried to kill me, Amanda. He's been systematically drugging me, sabotaging my career, and running a medical practice that harms the community it's supposed to serve. I have the resources to stop him, but I need allies who understand medicine better than I do. This is insane. Is it more insane than letting him continue to hurt people? Amanda was quiet for several minutes, her mind clearly racing through the implications. Even if you could somehow buy out the practice, you're not a doctor. You can't just run a medical facility. I know. That's why I need partners. Medical professionals who share my vision of what healthcare should be. Partners? I'm offering you the chance to be part of something better. To practice medicine the way you originally intended, with adequate resources and a mission focused on patient care rather than profit maximization. Amanda laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're offering me the chance to betray my current employer and potentially destroy my medical career. I'm offering you the chance to save your medical career. To practice with integrity instead of compromising your values every day. Elizabeth pulled up another document on her phone, the research she'd compiled about Amanda's background. You graduated from medical school with $200,000 in debt. You joined Bradley's practice because you needed the salary to manage your loan payments. But you also volunteer at free clinics in your spare time. You've published papers on healthcare access in underserved communities. This isn't about money for you, it's about being able to practice medicine according to your values. How do you know all this? Because I've been researching everyone involved in this situation. I know you, Amanda. I know what kind of doctor you wanted to be when you graduated medical school. I'm offering you the chance to be that doctor. Amanda stared at Elizabeth for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I want to buy out the practice through a combination of financial pressure and strategic partnerships. I want to remove Bradley entirely and restructure the operation as a community-focused clinic that maintains financial viability while providing accessible healthcare. And you want me to what, spy on Bradley? Sabotage the practice from the inside? I want you to help me understand the medical and operational aspects of what we're trying to build. I want you to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Elizabeth leaned back, giving Amanda space to process. But I need to know now whether you're with me or against me. Because once I start this process, there's no going back. Amanda's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her expression darkened. It's Bradley. He wants to meet with all the staff tomorrow morning for an important announcement. About practice security. He knows something. He knows you're out of the hospital and that the police have been asking questions. He's probably going to try to control the narrative, make it seem like you're unstable or vindictive. Elizabeth felt a surge of cold anger. Even now, even after everything, Bradley was trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Amanda, I need an answer. Are you going to help me, or are you going to let Bradley continue destroying lives? Amanda stared at her phone, at Bradley's message demanding her presence at tomorrow's meeting. When she looked up, her expression had hardened with resolve. What do you need me to do? First, I need you to document everything. Bradley's financial irregularities, his practice policies, any evidence of unethical behavior. Second, I need you to help me approach Dr. Webb about selling his partnership share. Marcus will never agree to work against Bradley. He follows Bradley's lead on everything. He doesn't have to work against Bradley. He just has to be willing to sell his 20% stake to someone offering above market value. You said he has student loans and a new baby, everyone has a price. Amanda nodded slowly. What about the staff? The nurses, the administrative people? We offer them better positions in the new structure. Better pay, better benefits, the opportunity to work in a practice that aligns with their professional values. And if Bradley fights back? Elizabeth's smile was sharp, predatory. Let him. I have $50 million, a documented case of attempted murder, and a growing understanding of just how many people he's hurt over the years. The question isn't whether I can destroy him, it's how much collateral damage he wants to cause while I do it. Amanda was quiet for another moment, then extended her hand across the table. I'm in. But I have conditions. Name them. First, patient care comes first. Always. Whatever we build has to be focused on providing excellent medical care, not on getting revenge against Bradley. Agreed. Second, I want a say in how the new practice operates. This can't just be your vision imposed on everyone else. Agreed. What else? Third, I want protection. Legal protection, financial protection, professional protection. If this goes wrong, I don't want to be left holding the bag. Elizabeth nodded. Jim Patterson will draw up agreements that protect everyone involved. You'll have legal immunity and financial security regardless of the outcome. They shook hands, and Elizabeth felt a surge of satisfaction. The first piece of her strategy was falling into place. There's something else, Amanda said. Something you should know about Bradley's practice that might help your takeover. What? He's been billing insurance companies for services that weren't provided. Nothing major, adding extra consultation time, inflating procedure codes, billing for tests that were never performed. It's been going on for at least a year. Elizabeth felt her pulse quicken. Do you have documentation? I have copies of some questionable bills. I've been keeping them because I was worried about being implicated if there was ever an investigation. Amanda, that's insurance fraud. That's not just grounds for firing, that's criminal charges. I know. I've been losing sleep over it for months, trying to decide whether to report it. Elizabeth's mind raced through the implications. Insurance fraud would give her additional leverage over Bradley, but it also meant the practice was in even more legal jeopardy than she'd realized. Can you get me copies of that documentation? Yes. But Elizabeth, if we expose the insurance fraud, it could bring down the entire practice. All the staff could lose their jobs, patients could lose their medical records, the whole thing could collapse into chaos. Or we could use it as leverage to force a clean transition. Offer Bradley a choice, face criminal charges for insurance fraud and attempted murder, or accept a buyout and walk away quietly. Amanda nodded slowly. That could actually work. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Elizabeth felt the pieces of her plan crystallizing. She had a medical professional willing to work with her, evidence of Bradley's criminal behavior, and a clear understanding of the practice's vulnerabilities. Amanda, one more thing. Tomorrow's staff meeting, I want you to record it. Everything Bradley says about me, about the situation, about his plans. I want documentation of any lies or threats he makes. That's risky. If he finds out, he won't find out. And if he does, it just gives us more evidence of his intimidation tactics. As Elizabeth drove home through Nashville's quiet streets, she felt a sense of momentum building. The takeover was no longer just a plan, it was becoming reality. Bradley Whitmore was about to discover that the woman he'd tried to destroy was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Phase 1 was complete. Amanda Collins was on her side, and the documentation of Bradley's crimes was within reach. Now it was time to move to Phase 2, approaching Dr. Webb and beginning the financial pressure that would force Bradley to choose between prosecution and surrender. Elizabeth smiled grimly as she pulled into her apartment complex. Bradley had taught her an important lesson about the nature of power and manipulation. Now she was going to teach him a lesson about the consequences of underestimating the woman he'd tried to kill. The war for the Whitmore family medical practice was about to begin. The text from Amanda came at 6:47 a.m., emergency staff meeting. Moved to 7:30. Bradley knows something. Be careful. Elizabeth sat in her kitchen, coffee growing cold as she stared at the message. She'd expected Bradley to react quickly once he realized the scope of what she was planning, but the timeline was accelerating faster than anticipated. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from Jim Patterson. We have a problem, he said. Without preamble. Bradley's hired Blackstone and Associates. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Blackstone was Nashville's most ruthless law firm, the kind that specialized in destroying opponents through intimidation and character assassination. How do you know? Because they just filed an emergency motion claiming you're mentally unstable and requesting a psychiatric evaluation before you can make any major financial decisions. They're trying to freeze your assets. On what grounds? They're claiming your recent erratic behavior, breaking off the engagement, making wild accusations against Bradley, combined with the trauma of your medical emergency suggests you're not competent to manage your finances. Elizabeth felt cold fury spreading through her chest. Even now, even after attempting to poison her, Bradley was trying to gaslight her into appearing unstable. Can they do that? They can try. I've already filed counter-motions, but Elizabeth, this is exactly the kind of legal warfare that can drag on for months. They're trying to tie up your resources so you can't fund the takeover. What about the insurance fraud documentation? Amanda said she could get us copies, that's the other problem. Amanda Collins called me 20 minutes ago. Someone broke into her apartment last night. Nothing valuable was taken, but her home office was ransacked. All her practice-related documents are missing. Elizabeth set down her coffee cup with deliberate care, her mind racing through the implications. Bradley's moving faster than we expected. It gets worse. I just got off the phone with Dr. Marcus Webb. He says Bradley contacted him last night with concerns about your mental state. Bradley's claiming you've been harassing him, making threats, and that you're planning some kind of vendetta against the practice. What did Webb say? He's scared. Bradley told him you might try to approach him about selling his partnership stake, and that any such offer would be evidence of your delusional thinking. Webb's been instructed to record any conversations with you and report them to Bradley immediately. Elizabeth began pacing her kitchen, the walls feeling like they were closing in. So Bradley's poisoned the well with Webb, stolen the evidence of his insurance fraud, and is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. What else? Check your email. He sent something to your entire professional network. Elizabeth opened her laptop, her heart sinking as she saw Bradley's message in her inbox. The subject line read, "Concern for Elizabeth Harper's well-being." The email was a masterpiece of manipulation, expressing worry for Elizabeth's mental health following their difficult breakup and her recent medical emergency. Bradley painted himself as a concerned ex-fiancé worried about Elizabeth's increasingly erratic behavior and paranoid accusations. The email was sent to everyone in Elizabeth's pharmaceutical industry contacts, her former colleagues, her university alumni network. Hundreds of people who knew her professionally had received Bradley's version of events, carefully crafted to make her appear unstable while maintaining his image as the concerned, reasonable one. He's destroying my professional reputation, Elizabeth said quietly. That's the goal. If he can't stop you legally, he'll try to isolate you professionally and socially. Make people think you're having a breakdown. Elizabeth's phone rang. Danny's name appeared on the screen. Liz, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from Bradley saying he's worried about you. He says you've been making threats and acting unstable. Danny, please tell me you didn't believe him. Of course I didn't believe him. The man tried to kill you. But he's calling everyone, our parents, your friends, people from work. He's very convincing, Liz. He sounds genuinely concerned and reasonable. Elizabeth sank into a chair, the scope of Bradley's counterattack becoming clear. He wasn't just fighting her legally, he was waging psychological warfare, using his charm and social connections to reframe the narrative. What did he say to our parents? He told them you're having a breakdown following your accident and that you're making wild accusations. He said he's tried to help but you've become hostile and paranoid. Mom's worried sick, and Dad's talking about driving up here. I need to call them, Liz, there's more. Bradley says he has medical documentation showing you've been prescribed psychiatric medication for anxiety and paranoid ideation. He's claiming your recent behavior is consistent with someone who stopped taking their medication. Elizabeth felt the walls of Bradley's trap closing around her. The anxiety medication Amanda had picked up, the prescription Elizabeth had never requested. Bradley had been planning this for weeks, maybe months, creating a paper trail that would support his claims of her mental instability. Jim, she said, putting the phone on speaker so her lawyer could hear, we need to move faster. If Bradley's trying to have me declared mentally incompetent, how long do we have? The psychiatric evaluation motion will be heard Friday. That gives us 4 days to mount a defense. But Elizabeth, if they can show a pattern of erratic behavior combined with prescription medication for psychiatric conditions, I never took those medications. I threw them away when I realized what they were. Can you prove that? Do you have the bottles? Witnesses who can testify you weren't exhibiting symptoms of mental illness? Elizabeth thought frantically. Becca Johnson at the Community Health Clinic. Mrs. Williams. They spent time with me yesterday, and I was completely rational. That helps, but it's not enough. We need more. Elizabeth's phone buzzed with another message from Amanda, staff meeting disaster. Bradley says you've been stalking him. Claims you showed up at his apartment last night making threats. Everyone believes him. I'm scared. He's lying, Elizabeth said aloud. I was home last night. I have receipts from dinner delivery, security footage from my building. That's good, Jim said. We can use that to show he's fabricating evidence. But Elizabeth, we need to go on the offensive. We can't just defend against his attacks. What do you mean? I mean we need to expose his crimes publicly before he can discredit you completely. The insurance fraud, the medication tampering, the attempted murder. We need to get ahead of his narrative. Elizabeth's mind raced through the options. What about Detective Santos? The criminal investigation? Moving slowly. Bradley's lawyers are claiming the medication switch was an accident, that someone at the pharmacy made an error. Without Amanda's documentation of the prescription fraud, it's hard to prove intent. Another text from Amanda: Bradley announced you're being investigated for harassment and threats. Says practice may need restraining order. Staff scared to talk to you. Need help. Elizabeth felt the trap tightening around her. Bradley was using his position, his charm, and his resources to paint her as an unstable woman seeking revenge against an innocent ex-fiancé. Every move she made could be reframed as evidence of her mental instability. We need allies, she said finally. People who can testify to Bradley's character, his practice policies, his treatment of patients. Like who? Mrs. Williams. Becca Johnson. Other patients who were turned away from his practice. Elizabeth's voice gained strength as she found her footing. If Bradley wants to make this about character and credibility, let's make it about character and credibility. That's risky. You'd be exposing vulnerable people to Bradley's retaliation. They're already being hurt by his policies. At least this way they have a chance to fight back. Elizabeth's laptop chimed with an email notification. Her heart sank as she saw it was from the pharmaceutical company considering her for a consulting position, the one legitimate opportunity Bradley hadn't been able to sabotage before his arrest. Dear Dr. Harper, we've received concerning information about your current personal situation and feel it would be best to postpone our collaboration until you've had time to address these issues. He's destroying everything, Elizabeth whispered. Not everything, Jim said firmly. Your patent sale is final. That money is yours regardless of what Bradley does. And Elizabeth, his desperate tactics are actually revealing something important. What? He's scared. Really scared. People who are confident in their position don't launch scorched earth campaigns like this. He knows you're dangerous to him, which means your plan was working. Elizabeth took a deep breath, forcing herself to think strategically rather than emotionally. So what do? We accelerate everything. Instead of a slow, careful takeover, we go nuclear. We expose everything at once: the insurance fraud, the medication tampering, the predatory practice policies. We make it impossible for him to maintain his credible facade. But you said we don't have enough evidence, then we get it. Today, Amanda's apartment was ransacked, but the insurance fraud happened on Bradley's computer system. Those records still exist. Elizabeth's phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Dr. Harper? This is Rebecca Johnson from the Community Health Clinic. We met yesterday. Becca, yes. How did you get this number? From Dr. Collins. She said you might need some help. Becca's voice was steady, determined. She told me what Bradley's trying to do to you, and I want you to know, we're not going to let him get away with it. We? The community he's been hurting. Mrs. Williams, the patients who've been turned away from his practice, the people who've been documenting his behavior for years. We've been waiting for someone with the resources to fight him. Elizabeth felt a surge of hope. What are you saying? I'm saying you're not alone in this fight. Bradley may have lawyers and money and social connections, but we have something more powerful: the truth, and people who are willing to tell it. Becca, if you help me, Bradley will come after you too. He'll try to destroy your reputation, your career. Let him try. I've been fighting for healthcare access in this community for 10 years. I'm not afraid of Bradley Whitmore. As Elizabeth ended the call, she realized that Bradley's desperate counterattack had revealed something he hadn't anticipated: the depth of community opposition to his practices. By trying to silence her so aggressively, he'd exposed himself to a broader coalition of people who'd been waiting for the chance to fight back. Jim, she said, change of plans. We're not just taking over Bradley's practice. We're going to. Bah. What do you mean? I mean we're going to expose every crime, every unethical practice, every person he's hurt. We're going to make him a case study in everything that's wrong with profit-driven healthcare. Elizabeth felt the fear and uncertainty of the morning crystallizing into cold determination. Bradley wanted to paint her as unstable? Fine. She'd show him what instability really looked like when $50 million and a community's worth of grievances were aimed at destroying everything he'd built. The question now wasn't whether she could survive Bradley's counterattack, it was whether he could survive hers. The courthouse steps were still warm from the Friday afternoon sun. When Elizabeth emerged with Jim Patterson, the judge's ruling fresh in her mind. The psychiatric evaluation motion had been dismissed, Bradley's fabricated evidence of her mental instability exposed as a desperate manipulation. But the victory felt hollow as she looked at the stack of legal documents in Jim's briefcase, the completed acquisition papers for the Whitmore family medical practice. "Congratulations," Jim said quietly. "You now own 70% of Bradley's medical practice." The past week had been a blur of legal maneuvers, financial transactions, and strategic revelations. Amanda's testimony about the insurance fraud, combined with Becca Johnson's documentation of turned-away patients, had created a perfect storm of evidence against Bradley. When faced with criminal prosecution and professional ruin, he'd accepted Elizabeth's buyout offer, though not gracefully. "Where is he now?" Elizabeth asked. "Packing his office. He has until Monday to vacate the premises." Jim's expression was grim. "He's not going quietly, Elizabeth. This morning he sent emails to every medical professional in Nashville claiming you're conducting a hostile takeover motivated by personal vendetta." Elizabeth climbed into Jim's car, exhaustion settling over her like a weight. "Let him. By the time we're done transforming that practice, his words won't matter." The drive to the practice took them through the heart of Nashville, past the neighborhoods Elizabeth had spent the week exploring. She'd met with dozens of community members, documenting years of healthcare discrimination and medical neglect. What she'd discovered had been both heartbreaking and infuriating, a systematic pattern of healthcare apartheid that divided Nashville along economic lines. "Are you ready for this?" Jim asked as they pulled into the practice parking lot. Elizabeth looked at the gleaming building that would now bear her responsibility. Through the windows, she could see staff members moving nervously, uncertain about their futures. Amanda's car was in the lot, along with several others Elizabeth didn't recognize. "I have to be." The lobby was tense when they entered. Bradley stood near the reception desk, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his charming mask completely abandoned. He looked up as Elizabeth approached, his expression cycling through rage, humiliation, and something that might have been fear. "Satisfied?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Not yet," Elizabeth replied calmly. "But it's a start. You have no idea what you're doing. Running a medical practice isn't like your little laboratory experiments. These are real people's lives you're playing with." Elizabeth felt a surge of cold fury. Real people's lives? Like Mrs. Williams' granddaughter, who almost died because your practice wouldn't treat her asthma attack? Like the dozens of patients you turned away because they couldn't afford your fees? "I provided quality medical care to people who could afford it. That's not a crime." "No, but insurance fraud is. Medication tampering is. Attempted murder is." Bradley's face flushed red. "You'll never prove any of that. I already have. That's why you're here packing your office instead of practicing medicine." Amanda appeared from the back offices, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Elizabeth, the staff is waiting in the conference room. They want to know what's going to happen to their jobs." Elizabeth nodded, then turned back to Bradley. "You have until 5 o'clock. Security will escort you out if you're not finished by then." As Bradley stalked toward his office, Elizabeth felt the weight of what she'd undertaken settling on her shoulders. She owned a medical practice. Now, with all the responsibilities that entailed, 16 employees were counting on her to maintain their livelihoods while she transformed the fundamental nature of their workplace. The conference room was crowded with nervous faces. Nurses, medical assistants, administrative staff, and Dr. Marcus Webb, who'd sold his partnership stake to Elizabeth for twice its market value rather than face potential complicity in Bradley's insurance fraud. They all looked at her with a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and hope. "I know you have questions," Elizabeth began. "First, let me be clear, no one is losing their job because of this transition. You all work here because you're good at what you do. What's changing is how we do it." A senior nurse named Patricia raised her hand. "Dr. Harper, we've heard rumors about turning this into some kind of charity clinic. Are we going to be taking pay cuts?" "Actually, you're getting raises," Elizabeth said, pulling out the compensation analysis Jim had prepared. 15% across the board, plus improved benefits and professional development opportunities. The tension in the room shifted noticeably. "The practice will maintain its current level of service for patients who can afford premium care," Elizabeth continued. "But we're also implementing sliding scale fees, accepting Medicaid patients, and establishing community health programs. We're going to serve the entire community, not just the wealthy part of it." Dr. Webb cleared his throat. "Dr. Harper, with respect, you're not a medical professional. How do you plan to oversee clinical operations? Elizabeth had expected this question. I don't. Dr. Collins will serve as medical director, with full authority over clinical decisions and patient care protocols. My role is operational and strategic, ensuring we have the resources and systems to provide excellent care to all our patients. Amanda stepped forward. I've been working with Dr. Harper on the transition plan. We're not lowering our standards of care, we're expanding access to that care. Elizabeth activated the presentation screen. Let me show you what we're building. The next hour was spent outlining the transformation plan. The practice would be restructured as Harper Community Medical, maintaining its current high-end services while adding community health programs, preventive care initiatives, and partnerships with local health organizations. The financial model showed how serving a broader patient base would actually increase revenue while improving community health outcomes. Questions? Elizabeth asked when she'd finished. Patricia raised her hand again. This sounds almost too good to be true. What's the catch? The catch is that we have to work harder and be more creative about how we deliver care. We'll see more patients, deal with more complex insurance situations, and probably face criticism from people who think healthcare should be rationed by ability to pay. What about Dr. Whitmore? Asked Sarah, one of the medical assistants. He's been calling this a vendetta. Elizabeth had prepared for this question too. Dr. Whitmore tried to kill me with tampered medication. He's been running insurance fraud schemes and turning away patients who needed care. This isn't a vendetta, it's justice. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Patricia spoke up. Dr. Harper, I've been working here for 8 years. I became a nurse because I wanted to help people, but lately I felt like I was just helping rich people get richer. If you're serious about this transformation, you have my full support. One by one, the other staff members voiced their agreement. Elizabeth felt a surge of hope as she realized that most of Bradley's employees had been as uncomfortable with his policies as she was. When do we start? Amanda asked. Monday. But first, we have a community meeting tomorrow at the Nolensville Community Health Center. I want everyone there to see what we're building and understand that they're welcome here. As the meeting broke up, Elizabeth found herself alone with Amanda in the conference room. Through the windows, they could see Bradley loading boxes into his Mercedes, his movements sharp with anger. Are you sure about this? Amanda asked. Transforming a practice this size, serving the community we want to serve, it's going to be incredibly challenging. I know. But Amanda, what's the alternative? Let Bradley's model continue? Let healthcare remain a luxury good instead of a human right? No, you're right. It's just intimidating. Elizabeth looked around the conference room where Bradley had held his staff meetings, where decisions had been made about who deserved care and who didn't. Tomorrow, this room would host conversations about how to expand access, how to serve the underserved, how to make healthcare a force for community building rather than division. Everything worth doing is intimidating, she said. But we're not doing this alone. As if summoned by her words, Becca Johnson appeared in the doorway. How did it go? Better than expected. The staff is on board, the financing is solid, and we start Monday. Good, because Mrs. Williams is in the lobby with about 20 other community members. They want to see the place that's going to be serving them. Elizabeth followed Becca to the lobby, where she found a group of people she'd met over the past week, elderly residents, working families, people who'd been turned away from this very building under Bradley's policies. Mrs. Williams stood at the center of the group, her dignity intact despite years of medical discrimination. Dr. Harper, Mrs. Williams said, we wanted to thank you. Not just for what you're doing here, but for listening to us. For believing that we deserve the same quality of care as everyone else. Elizabeth felt tears stinging her eyes. Mrs. Williams, I should be thanking you. You and everyone here taught me what healthcare is supposed to be about. What happens now? Asked a young mother Elizabeth recognized from the community health center. Now we prove that excellent medical care and community service aren't mutually exclusive. We show Nashville what healthcare looks like when it's driven by compassion instead of profit. As the community members toured the facility, many seeing the inside for the first time, Elizabeth felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She destroyed Bradley's empire, but destruction was easy. Building something better would require everything she'd learned about science, business, and human nature. Her phone buzzed with a text from Danny, saw the news about the acquisition. Mom and Dad are proud of you. So am I. When do I get to see the new practice? Elizabeth smiled, typing back, Monday. We're having a grand reopening. As the sun set over Nashville, Elizabeth stood in the lobby of what had been the Whitmore family medical practice, watching community members explore the facility that would soon serve them. Through the windows, she could see Bradley's Mercedes disappearing into traffic, carrying him away from the wreckage of his career. But Elizabeth wasn't watching him leave. She was watching Mrs. Williams examine the patient education materials, seeing the hope in a young mother's eyes as Amanda explained the new sliding scale fee structure, witnessing the birth of something that could change how an entire community thought about healthcare. The practice transformation was complete on paper. The real transformation, proving that profit and compassion could coexist, that excellent care could be accessible care, was just beginning. Danny's rental car pulled into the Harper Community Medical parking lot on a crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the practice's grand reopening. Elizabeth watched from her office window as her brother climbed out, his familiar lanky frame scanning the bustling facility with the analytical eye of a software engineer assessing a new system. The parking lot told the story of transformation better than any metrics could. Luxury cars still occupied premium spots, the practice's affluent patients hadn't disappeared, but they now shared space with older sedans, pickup trucks, and the occasional city bus dropping off patients who'd never had access to this level of care before. Elizabeth met Danny in the lobby, where Mrs. Williams was helping her granddaughter Keisha with homework at one of the new family seating areas. The elderly woman looked up as they approached, her face brightening with recognition. "Danny," she called out. "I've heard so much about you. Your sister talks about you constantly." Danny's eyebrows rose as he glanced at Elizabeth. "She does? Every day. My brother would love this new patient management system. Danny always said healthcare should be accessible to everyone." Mrs. Williams' eyes twinkled with mischief. "She's very proud of you." Elizabeth felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the past month, she'd found herself sharing details of her life with the community members who'd become regular fixtures at the practice. It was a stark contrast to her relationship with Bradley, where her family had gradually become peripheral, mentioned only when convenient for his narrative. "Mrs. Williams has become our unofficial patient advocate," Elizabeth explained as they walked toward her office. "She helps newcomers navigate the system and provides feedback on how we can improve." "Unofficial?" Danny asked. "Well, technically she's on the payroll now. Community liaison coordinator." Danny stopped walking. "You're paying patients to help other patients?" "I'm paying community members to help the practice serve the community better. Mrs. Williams understands the needs and concerns of our patient population better than any consultant could." They passed the bustling nurses' station where Amanda was reviewing charts with Patricia and 2 newly hired nurse practitioners. The energy was palpably different from Elizabeth's memories of the sterile, hushed atmosphere under Bradley's management. People were talking, laughing, collaborating. "It's loud," Danny observed. "It's alive," Elizabeth corrected. Under Bradley, this place felt like a mausoleum. Now it feels like what a healthcare facility should feel like, a place where people come to get better. Elizabeth's office had been completely redesigned. Gone were Bradley's intimidating mahogany furnishings and medical school diplomas arranged to impress. In their place were comfortable seating areas, community health certificates, and walls covered with thank you notes from patients. Danny settled into a chair across from her desk, his expression thoughtful. "Liz, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Are you happy?" The question caught Elizabeth off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've accomplished everything you set out to do. You destroyed Bradley, took over his practice, transformed it into something that serves the community. You've gotten your revenge and your justice. So are you happy?" Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I'm fulfilled. I feel like I'm doing meaningful work for the first time in years." "That's not the same thing as being happy, isn't it?" Danny leaned forward. "Liz, you've been working 16-hour days for a month. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? When's the last time you laughed about something that wasn't work-related?" Elizabeth tried to remember and came up blank. "Danny, we're still in the startup phase. Things will settle down, will they? Or will you find new projects, new problems to solve, new ways to prove that you're not the person Bradley tried to make you into?" The words hit harder than Elizabeth had expected. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm worried that you've swung so far in the opposite direction from who you were with Bradley that you've lost yourself again, just differently." Elizabeth felt defensive anger rising. "I'm helping people. I'm making a difference." "I know. And I'm proud of you for that. But Liz, when's the last time you called Mom and Dad just to chat? When's the last time you did something creative or fun that had nothing to do with proving a point?" Before Elizabeth could answer, there was a knock on her door. Becca Johnson entered, carrying a stack of patient feedback forms and wearing the expression of someone with good news to share. "Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to show you the community health survey results." Becca's Enthusiasm was infectious. Patient satisfaction is up 40% from baseline, and we've had zero complaints about accessibility or discrimination. That's wonderful, Elizabeth said, but she noticed Danny studying her reaction. There's more, Becca continued. The Nashville Health Department wants to use us as a model program. They're talking about replicating our community integration approach at other facilities. Elizabeth felt a surge of professional pride, but also something else, a restless energy that immediately began spinning toward the next challenge, the next project, the next problem to solve. After Becca left, Danny was quiet for a long moment. You did it again. Did what? The moment she mentioned expansion, I could see your mind racing toward the next big project. Liz, you just spent 3 months orchestrating one of the most complex business transformations I've ever seen. Don't you think you deserve to enjoy the success for a minute before diving into the next challenge? Elizabeth looked out her office window at the busy practice, at the community members moving through spaces that had once excluded them, at the evidence of positive change she'd created through determination and strategic thinking. I don't know how to just enjoy success, she admitted quietly. I know. And I think that's something Bradley exploited, your need to constantly prove yourself, to always be achieving, to always be moving toward the next goal. The observation stung because it felt true. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe the most revolutionary thing you could do right now is learn to be content with what you've accomplished. To exist without constantly striving, without needing to justify your worth through achievement. Elizabeth was quiet for several minutes, processing Danny's words. Outside her office, the practice hummed with activity, Amanda consulting with a patient, Mrs. Williams helping a nervous teenager understand his treatment options, Patricia training a new medical assistant on their sliding scale fee protocols. Danny, can I show you something? They walked through the practice together, Elizabeth pointing out the changes she'd implemented. The expanded lab services that allowed for more comprehensive care. The patient education center where community members could learn about preventive health measures. The conference room that hosted monthly community health forums. This is incredible, Danny said as they finished the tour. You've built something amazing here. But I'm worried about what it's costing you personally. You've been so focused on transformation and justice and community service that I'm not sure you've processed your own trauma. They ended up in the practice's small break room, sharing coffee and the comfortable silence of siblings who'd known each other their entire lives. You know what I realized watching you today? Danny asked. What? You talk about every patient, every staff member, every community program with genuine passion and care. But when I ask about your own well-being, you deflect to work accomplishments. Elizabeth stirred her coffee, considering his words. Maybe work is my well-being right now. Maybe. Or maybe you're avoiding dealing with the fact that someone you trusted tried to kill you. The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Elizabeth realized that in all her strategic planning and community building, she'd never really processed the emotional reality of Bradley's betrayal. I dream about the pharmacy sometimes, she said quietly. About not being able to breathe, about being alone and scared while he was playing golf with investors. Have you talked to anyone about that? A therapist, a counselor? I've been too busy, Liz. She looked at her brother, seeing the concern in his eyes. No. I haven't talked to anyone about it. Why not? Elizabeth thought about the question. Because talking about it feels like letting him win. Like admitting that he damaged me. Or maybe talking about it is how you make sure he doesn't continue to damage you. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching through the break room window as the practice continued its daily rhythm of healing and care. What if I don't know who I am when I'm not fighting or achieving or proving something? Elizabeth asked finally. Then we figure it out together. The same way we figured out everything else when we were kids. Elizabeth felt tears threatening. For the first time in weeks. I'm scared, Danny. Of what? Of slowing down enough to realize how much he hurt me. Of discovering that I don't know how to be happy without having something to overcome. Danny reached across the table and took her hand. Liz, you've spent the last 3 months proving that you're one of the strongest, most capable people I know. Don't you think you're strong enough to face your own healing? As they prepared to leave the practice that evening, Elizabeth found herself looking at the community members in the lobby with new eyes. Mrs. Williams was helping an elderly gentleman navigate his insurance paperwork. A young mother was reading to her children in the family area. Amanda was talking with a teenage patient about preventive care. These people had trusted her with their health care, their community, their hopes for something better. Maybe, Elizabeth thought, it was time to trust herself with her own healing. Danny, she said as they reached his car, would you help me find a therapist? Of course. And maybe we could plan a weekend together? Just siblings, no work, no community health initiatives, no transformation projects? Danny's smile was the first completely relaxed expression she'd seen from him all day. I thought you'd never ask. As Elizabeth watched her brother drive away, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility that she could be enough, just as she was, without constantly proving her worth through achievement. The practice transformation had been a success. Now it was time for the more difficult work of personal transformation, learning to live with victory instead of constantly preparing for the next battle. 1 year later, the September morning air carried the scent of autumn as Elizabeth stood on the steps of Harper Community Medical, watching volunteers set up for the practice's first annual health fair. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, advertising free health screenings, vaccination clinics, and educational workshops. The parking lot had been transformed into a festival space where medical care met community celebration. Hard to believe. It's only been a year, Amanda said, joining Elizabeth on the steps. The stress lines that had marked Amanda's face during Bradley's reign had been replaced by the satisfied exhaustion of meaningful work. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, Elizabeth replied, watching Mrs. Williams direct a group of teenagers setting up the blood pressure screening station. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. The health fair represented everything the practice had become, a place where healthcare was accessible, dignified, and community-centered. Local restaurants had donated food, high school students volunteered as interpreters, and several of Nashville's other medical facilities had set up information booths, inspired by Harper Community Medical's model. Dr. Harper? A young voice interrupted her thoughts. Keisha Williams, now 9 years old and asthma-free thanks to consistent, affordable care, tugged on Elizabeth's sleeve. Grandma wants you to see something. Elizabeth followed Keisha to where Mrs. Williams stood beside a display board covered with photos and testimonials from the past year. Patients who'd received life-changing care, families who'd avoided medical bankruptcy, community members who'd accessed preventive services that caught problems early. This is our real annual report, Mrs. Williams said with quiet pride. Numbers don't tell the whole story, but these do. Elizabeth studied the faces, people whose lives had been touched by accessible healthcare. Among them was a photo of herself from 6 months ago, taken during the practice's community diabetes education program. She was laughing at something a patient had said, her expression relaxed and genuine in a way that reminded her of who she'd been before Bradley, before the long years of manipulation and self-doubt. Elizabeth, a familiar voice called from across the crowd. She turned to see Jim Patterson approaching with a man she didn't immediately recognize. The stranger was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the careful neutrality of someone used to difficult conversations. I'd like you to meet someone, Jim said. This is Dr. Michael Chen from the Centers for Disease Control. He's been following our community health model. Dr. Chen extended his hand. Dr. Harper, I've been studying your transformation of this practice. The CDC is interested in developing a national program based on your approach. Elizabeth felt the familiar flutter of professional excitement, but also something new, a measured response rather than immediate impulse to dive into the next big project. That's flattering, Dr. Chen. What exactly are you proposing? A pilot program in 5 cities, replicating your model of community-integrated healthcare. We'd like you to serve as the national director. 6 months ago, Elizabeth would have said yes immediately. The offer represented validation, expansion, the chance to prove herself on an even larger stage. Now, she found herself considering not just the opportunity, but the cost. That's quite an offer, she said carefully. Could you give me some time to think about it? Dr. Chen looked surprised, apparently he'd expected immediate enthusiasm. Of course. Take all the time you need. As he walked away, Jim studied Elizabeth's face. A year ago, you would have accepted before he finished asking. A year ago, I thought my worth was measured by the size of my next achievement. And now? Elizabeth looked around the health fair, at the community she'd become part of rather than just served. Now I think my worth might be measured by the depth of my impact, not the breadth of my ambition. A commotion near the entrance caught her attention. A familiar figure was walking through the crowd, Bradley Whitmore, looking older and less polished than she remembered. He moved uncertainly, as if unsure of his reception, his once commanding presence diminished. Several community members noticed him, their conversation stopping as word spread through the crowd. Elizabeth felt tension ripple through the gathering, but also something else, a collective sense of protectiveness toward the space they'd all helped create. Bradley approached slowly, his hands empty of the arrogance that had once defined him. When he reached Elizabeth, he stopped several feet away, respecting the boundary her posture created. Elizabeth, he said quietly. I was hoping I could speak with you. We have nothing to discuss, Bradley. I know. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. His voice carried a weariness she'd never heard before. I wanted to apologize. Elizabeth studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated charm that had once fooled her so completely. Instead, she saw something that looked like genuine remorse. For which part, she asked. The systematic sabotage of my career? The gaslighting? The attempted murder? Bradley flinched at each accusation. For all of it. For everything I did. To you, and for everything I failed to do for this community. Mrs. Williams had appeared at Elizabeth's side, her presence both supportive and protective. Dr. Whitmore, she said with careful dignity. What brings you here today? I wanted to see what you'd built, Bradley said, his gaze moving across the health fair. I wanted to understand what I'd been too arrogant to see before. And what do you see? Elizabeth asked. Bradley was quiet for a long moment, watching a young father getting his blood pressure checked while his toddler played nearby, seeing elderly patients receiving free eye exams, observing teenagers learning about nutrition and preventive care. I see what medicine should be, he said finally. I see what I could have built if I'd cared more about people than profit. What do you want, Bradley? I want to help. The words hung in the air, met by skeptical silence from the small crowd that had gathered. I've been working at a free clinic in Memphis, Bradley continued. Learning what it means to practice medicine for people who can't pay. Learning what I should have known all along. Elizabeth felt the weight of the moment, the choice between continued punishment and the possibility of redemption. A year ago, her response would have been shaped by anger and the need for continued victory. Now, she found herself thinking about what would serve the community best. Mrs. Williams, she said, what do you think? The elderly woman studied Bradley with the wisdom of someone who'd seen both cruelty and transformation. I think everyone deserves the chance to do better, she said finally. But chances have to be earned. Elizabeth nodded. If you want to help, Bradley, you can volunteer at the screening tables. But you work under supervision, you follow our protocols, and you treat every person here with the dignity they deserve. Bradley's relief was visible. Thank you. As he walked toward the volunteer coordinator, Elizabeth felt a strange sense of completion. The revenge she'd planned had become something larger, not just justice for herself, but transformation for an entire community, and now possibly redemption for the man who'd tried to destroy her. Danny appeared beside her, having driven down from Atlanta for the health fair. How does it feel? What? Winning. Really, completely winning. Elizabeth considered the question, looking at the thriving community around her, at the practice that had become a model for accessible healthcare, at the man who'd once tried to kill her now humbly serving the people he'd once excluded. It feels like the beginning, she said. Like everything we've built here is just the foundation for what comes next. The best revenge, Elizabeth had learned, wasn't destruction, it was creation. It was building something so much better than what had been torn down, that the original seemed not just defeated, but irrelevant. As the sun climbed higher over Nashville, illuminating a community gathering around the shared belief that healthcare was a human right, Elizabeth Harper knew she'd found something more valuable than revenge. She'd found her purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload. From us,